Hope everyone has had a good week. My week has been pretty good. I got a lot of work done, and this weekend we don't really have much going on, so I'm pretty excited to just kind of chill out and maybe do something fun with the kids, and have a nice, relaxing weekend. So very rare that we have one of those in the summer for sure. But today I wanted to talk a little bit about blood glucose or blood sugar. So I have recently attached a continuous blood glucose monitor to myself here. Let's see if I can show you right there. Um, and so this device puts a little kind of like a needle, very small needle, into your body, and it continuously every 5 minutes checks your blood sugar, so you can, or blood glucose, so you can see what's happening with that throughout the day. And if you're not familiar with what blood glucose is something that actually is very common on most blood work. When you look at your blood work from your doctor, you probably see something like fasting blood glucose in the morning on there. And so it can be measured in blood typically. And or you can do it at home. It's very common at home with a little home blood glucose monitor where you prick your finger and put a drop of blood on a strip and it will tell you what it is at any given time. But recently, healthy individuals have been given access to these continuous blood glucose monitors through a couple of different companies. The one I'm happy to be using is Levels Health in this case. And I'm just doing it as an experiment to kind of, one, test out the new CGM that they're offering, which is a newer one that I've tried in the past, but also just to kind of check in on myself. I haven't used one in about 2 years or so, a little more than a year and a half. And so I just want to check in. I've made a lot of kind of dietary shifts and changes over the past year and a half. And so I just want to check in and see how things are going. Like I said, every 5 minutes, this little device will give you a reading on your blood sugar. And this is important. Having a healthy metabolism and living a healthy life is one of the key pieces of that is to making sure that you have healthy metabolic function. And one of the best indicators of a good metabolic function is having a healthy blood glucose response, both in the morning and throughout the day, given the meals that you're taking in, as well as the exercise that you're doing. And what happens with a lot of people today is that they're not metabolically healthy, and a lot of that has to do with dysregulated blood sugar because they're eating a lot of calories. They're taking in a lot of highly processed foods, which are rich in easily digestible sugars and starches and stuff like that. They're not eating a lot of whole foods, and they're not doing a lot of movement, either just regular movement, just moving their bodies, or exercise. And all of these things contribute to poor metabolic function. And what ends up happening when we have poor metabolic function is dysregulated blood sugar. And what we see end up happening is a high fasting blood sugar. So they'll have something, that's a little bit higher than normal is. And then people will have just elevated blood sugar throughout the day. They might eat a meal and it will skyrocket to a very high number, and then never come back down. It'll stay that way for the rest of the day. And having chronically high blood sugar leads to a whole bunch of different problems, especially related to cardiovascular health, etc. So I can go into much more details here, and there's a lot of things I'm just breezing over, etc. But it's a discussion, a very long discussion, very technical discussion, but at a high level, that's kind of why this is important. And so what I want to do maybe over the next few weeks is kind of show you some of the things that I see in myself and someone that I consider healthy. My last blood work had a optimal blood sugar, fasting blood sugar, optimal A1C, optimal fasting insulin, optimal C-peptide. All those are markers of just healthy blood sugar regulation. So by all means, everything's good for my blood work. And so I wanted to kind of show you what my blood sugar response looks like throughout the day under various different conditions and testing various different foods. And just some insights that you can gain from this. And then some of it might go against what you might hear in the health space. But I think that what we see in healthy individuals is a little bit different than what people might suggest as what is quote unquote healthy for people. So with that, I'm just going to share my screen of my phone so that you can see what it looks like on my app. So here is the Levels app on my phone. And I wanted to start out with last Monday, July 25th, because it's kind of like a very typical day of both exercise and eating for me. So just to give you a little context of what an average day kind of looks like for me. So you'll see kind of in the morning, I wake up around 5 o'clock. So around 5 o'clock, I always have, me personally, I seem to have this little peak right at 5 o'clock, and then a little dip afterwards. So you'll see at around 5 o'clock, I'm around 100 milligrams per deciliter, and then all of a sudden it kind of plummets down back into the 80s. And usually it goes a little bit lower than that. It usually gets into the low 80s, 70s. You'll see in some other days here. But plummets down into 80s. And then around 6 o'clock, you'll start to see it go back up. And that's because around 6 o'clock, I start to do some morning movement. So here I'll do a bike, row, some work on the ski erg. So you'll see it rise in response to that movement here. It's not terribly intense, but it's intense enough to cause me to spike my blood sugar a little bit, which is fine. That's a normal physiological response. You want to see that spike when you start to exert yourself, your body a little bit. Like I said, it's not terribly hard. The ski erg is probably the hardest part of that stuff, and that's where I typically see it go up the highest, and then it starts to come back down once I finish that up, and then start to walk a little bit. So that's a typical spike that you would see during some kind of somewhat moderate, I would say moderate exercise. And that's nothing to be worried about. That's just your body releasing stored glycogen or blood sugar to fuel the work that you're doing. Then it'll come back down, and around 7 o'clock or so, I start to get in the car and bring the kids to school. And you'll all see it dip down into the 70s, kind of hover around there until I have breakfast, which is around 8:15 or so. So my first meal of the day here, around 8:15. What I had this morning was some eggs, white rice, some vegetables, banana, and some salmon. In total, I had over 100 grams of carbohydrates. That's about 200 grams of white rice and about 96 grams of banana, plus all the carbs from incidental carbs from the vegetables and stuff like that. So that totaled pretty much over 100 grams in that one meal, which is a pretty typical breakfast for me. As you'll see, I'm eating a fair amount of carbohydrates. So I start off at around 83 milligrams per deciliter, peaks up around 117 or so, and then it starts to come back down. And around here, I'm probably walking a little bit. I usually go for a walk around 9:30 or so after I eat my breakfast. I finish my breakfast. So you see it drop down a little bit. Movement is probably one of the best ways to bring blood sugar down. But even at its peak, here, 117 milligrams per deciliter is for 100 grams of carbs in one shot, one sitting, is nothing. And by 9:40 or so, so just a little over an hour later, I'm at or below my where I started. And that's a healthy response. That's what you want to see. You want to see this peak, and you could even see it higher than this. You'll see it higher a little bit later on, and then kind of come back down around 2 hours or so. You want to be back around normal. So it comes back up a little bit, but nothing too high, and kind of starts to drop back down again. So that's what a 100-gram whack of carbs looks like in one sitting for me, which is pretty decent. I think that's a pretty healthy response, and to that meal. Then I work out. So you'll see here later on in the day around 11 o'clock, I did some deadlifts this day. It was a strength training session that included a lot of deadlifting. So I see a little peak here up to like 119, right? Again, you're exercising, your body's releasing stored glycogen, blood sugar. You want to see that peak as you're exercising. And then it comes back down, and then I go for a walk after I finish my strength training session. Then I have lunch. So around lunchtime, I'm sitting around 96, which is not bad. And for lunch, I had some veggies. I don't know what kind of meat I had. Oh, it looks like lobster and some veggies and some lobster and oatmeal with blueberries and strawberries on it. Again, that's probably sitting around 80 grams of carbohydrates for that meal. And again, it started out at around 98 in the meal. I hit 128, 129, and then come back down. Took a little bit longer to come back down. This might be, again, I like to go for a walk after every meal, so I probably delayed my walk a little bit. I might have been working for a little bit and came back down. But even within 2 hours, I was back down into the 80s, 90s, which is what you want to see, right? So a little bit of an extended peak here, but again, I ate 80 grams of carbs and I was sitting on my butt while I did it, and it came back down right back to where it started within 2 hours, which is what you want. And again, the peak is not terribly high. It's 120, 130, probably. I will say 130 as a peak, and for 80 grams of carbohydrates, again, pretty decent response to that as well. Then let's see. At dinner time here, I have another meal. So around 6 o'clock, we usually have dinner. So I'm hovering around 80, 90, around 6 o'clock when I start my meal. This meal is a giant whack of carbohydrates. So I had steak, sweet potatoes, squash, sweet potato, acorn squash, some veggies. Then I had a banana with a siete burrito-sized tortilla with some nut butter and a Birch Benders waffle. I think it was, let me just check real quick. I think that was 178 grams of carbohydrates. So almost 200 grams of carbohydrates in that meal. I go a little peak here at 120. Then it kind of comes down. Again, no movement really after this. It's just like cleaning up dishes and stuff like that, putting the kids to bed. I sit back down on the couch. It comes back up a little bit. Sitting a little high here, but again, I ate 200 grams of carbohydrates. I'm expecting it to do this. So not the best response. I've seen better responses to this, honestly. In this case, it's not the best response. It kind of floats up around 110 for a little bit here before it ends up dropping back down a little bit later in the night here. You see it comes back down after I go to bed. It drops back down. Here we're sitting kind of in the dropped down to the 70s and came back up to the 90s while I'm sleeping here. So, not the best response to that meal, but it was a fairly large quantity of carbohydrates, and I didn't really move much after there. I was kind of sitting on the couch. So you can see how much of a movement makes a big difference here. And then we kind of go back and throughout the night here. So that's kind of a typical response for a normal day here. So I just wanted to share that. I know this is getting a little bit long, so I'm going to cut it off there. There's lots of other insights that I have, even from last week alone, that I'd love to share with you. And I think I will share over the course of the next few weeks with various videos on different topics. But if you have any questions or comments about this, experiments you want me to try or do, or things I might have noticed, please leave me a comment below, or direct message me or anything like that. I'm happy to chat a little bit about that. But that's like a typical day for me. Like I said, the evening meal, I probably normally see a little bit of a better response, but sometimes it gets a little wonky. But considering I ate 180 grams of carbohydrates inside my butt, not, it's okay, I think, and a healthy individual. And it does come back down. It doesn't shoot up to, what would be bad is if it stayed up to like, 160, 180, and then sat there for 2 hours straight. Like I touched 130 and kind of hovered around 110 for a little bit, and then kind of dropped back down as I went to bed. So, what I would not want to see, which I have a pretty good example of something I would not want to see from another meal that I ate a little bit later on, which isn't even as terrible as I'm describing, but I would not want to see hovering around 160, 180, 200, that range for hours on the end. That would be bad. That would be a very bad response to something like that. But I'll take the peak at 130 or so, and then drop back down and kind of hover around 110 for a little bit before it comes back down. But again, I felt fine after that meal. I didn't feel lethargic or lightheaded or just crashed out on the couch or anything like that. I had plenty of energy. I was probably working, which is something I typically do at night. So I didn't feel bad after I did that either. So that's the other thing to keep in mind when we're talking about these blood sugar responses is not only just what the response is, because I could have a perfectly normal response, but if I felt like absolute garbage after that, eating that amount of carbohydrates or that particular carbohydrate, then that would be another thing that would, warrant me to be more mindful of what I'm eating. But I wouldn't need a CGM to tell me that either. So that's the other thing to keep in mind too. So again, any questions or comments about this quick example of what an average day of eating? So in total that day, I consumed almost 400 grams of carbohydrates if you add them all up, which is a healthy whack of carbohydrates. It's certainly not low carb. Um, I eat a lot to fuel the activity that I'm doing. Probably not typical for most people, and I wouldn't suggest it if you're someone who's not very active like me. But for me and myself, this tends to do okay. So questions, comments, hit me up. Let me know if there's other things you want to see me talk about or know about throughout my day. Please leave them in the questions or on the comments below, or direct message me, and happy to create other videos on those topics. And with that, I want to say thank you. If you are interested in one-on-one coaching, please go to my website, rjbhealth.coach. Click the discovery call button on the homepage and fill out the form, and we can talk more about coaching. If you want to know more about blood sugar or dial in your blood sugar or stuff like that, I can help you out with that. And if you want to keep up to date of all the stuff that I put out, including these videos, the best way to do that is to jump on the newsletter. You can do that by rjbhealth.coach and clicking the newsletter link at the top. And then from there, you can enter your email address, and I will email you links to the videos and blog posts and all the cool stuff that I put out. And that's the best way to keep up with what I'm putting out on a daily basis. All right. With that, I hope everyone has a good weekend, and I will talk to you all next week.